Quick disclaimer before the actual video. Please, for the love of any god out there, do not comment before you fully watch this video. Don't leave a first comment either, because that should kinda stop being funny in 2008 when your father stopped loving you. And if you are one of the idiots I describe in this video, please, I'm fucking begging you, block my channel, unsubscribe, mute, anything, and just move on. Just go away. I don't want you ever here no matter what, because I or anyone else will never ever be able to change your mind about a lot of the things I'm going to talk about in the video. It's fine if you disagree and can be civil about it, but for the majority of these idiots in my YouTube comment sections, it just devolves into stupid and irrelevant shit, so I'm just going to delete your waste of a comment if you do post it. But I do hope that many of you will actually watch this, and perhaps it will give you a new perspective on the subject matter I chose to cover, and the underlying theme of toxic casuals that I had to tread carefully around in the past in previous videos, such as why can't you find tanks in ESO, the social problems in ESO, the history of feedback groups in ESO, even guides where we discuss raid compositions and optimizations for ESO. And this thread of toxic casuals as a theme runs in other content creator videos as well if you pay close attention, such as Dot's Gaming's gaslighting of the PvP community, or the toxic positivity videos by Solomon UK. This video is going to be not just a resource for other community leaders like me, an exposition in regards to the massive problem the ESO community is infested with, but also my personal dialogue and connecting with other rational human beings out there on potential solutions to this problem, along with the nature of said problem, and that problem is the toxic casuals. This video will include the definition, history, examples, and of course specific messages to specific groups as a closing to the year 2021. What is a toxic casual? Well, we all know what a toxic elitist is, or is apparently supposed to be. Many would define the trope of a toxic elitist to be some sort of gatekeeping individual who berates newer or less experienced players who stroke their egos in order to compensate for being some sort of gaming geek. Someone who, at least within the context of ESO, tries to force the evil meta or best-in-slot concepts upon the pure-hearted Skyrim generation of ESO casual players, no matter the setting, whether it's normal dungeon or a veteran trial. So what is a toxic casual? Interestingly, the concept or various definitions of a toxic casual isn't just in ESO, it's also present in other MMOs, such as World of Warcraft, Final Fantasy XIV, and yes, even Guild Wars.
And this is why people are very, very aggressive with each other as well. And I think with Guild Wars 2, there is the added element that you have something very, very interesting, which isn't just casual players, you have very toxic casual players, right? You have a lot of very entitled players. And this is cultured from the game itself. Like, the game does not require you to really put in any effort to get any of the rewards. Okay, that is to say, even if you are literally the worst player ever and you only auto attack, you'll get all the legendaries, pretty much no problem, right? Not exactly the hardest thing in the universe. So when something like a raid comes along or a challenge mode and you can't get that reward anymore, you're upset, you're mad, you're entitled, right? Because you don't want to get good. You don't want to have to know what your ability. You don't want to read tooltips. What's reading? You did all that at school. What the hell is that? I don't want to do reading anymore, right?
And I have my 9 jobs and my 15 children.
Exactly. You get mad. I don't want to have to interact with another human being in my massively multiplayer online game. I don't want to do that. And it's the same thing with PvP, of course, right? I don't want to have to fight other players. This is ridiculous. They should put this in open world PvE as well. And obviously this is insane, right? Like, these people are idiots. They want to devalue and remove any kind of value with any reward or anything within the game, and just kind of put it into a giant mush where it doesn't matter what you've done, everything is irrelevant and nothing matters, which would just be a terrible game. But that's what people want. Not very vocal minority.
While perhaps there may be similar elements in what was just described by Mighty Teapot, I'll draw distinctions between his definition and the ESO definition, as Guild Wars and ESO are, after all, two very different games with two very different player bases. By definition, an ESO toxic casual is an individual part of the demographic majority in ESO, hence casual, an individual who attacks or scapegoats minority demographics in ESO, an individual who claims such actions are in the best interest of the community, an individual who effectively uses double standards, lack of understanding, and hypocrisy to undermine minority demographics. And lastly, a toxic casual is an individual who actually does gatekeep other casual players. While some other games may see the toxic casual as a vocal minority, as said by Mighty Teapot, in ESO it is quite unfortunately a large part of the majority of the population. I've gone over the history of why this is in previous videos, but for your sake, let's just go over it again. If we could choose a historical focal point in which mass sentiment turned aggressively against this perception of elitism, or toxicity, or endgame players in general, it would be Entropy Rising, the guild representation of the former Tamriel Foundry website, which many players accuse of getting special treatment with the developers. After this, throughout 2015 and well into 2016, the available mediums of communication, including the ESO subreddit, the official ESO forums, and yes, Facebook, became flooded with general mistrust and misinformation regarding all kinds of things in ESO, from stats to builds, especially when it came to tackling harder content such as Maw of Lorcaj. This was also largely in part due to the wildfire mantra of play how you want, which, by the way, originally comes from the back cover of ESO's first CD case, Play the Way You Like. And as Play How You Want was officially acknowledged by the devs in some capacity and continues to be so as an attractive characteristic of ESO, well, of course, it was natural for a lot of people to start scapegoating concepts like meta, or best in slot, or communities that enjoyed, ironically enough, optimizing because that's how they wanted to play. The pushback against perceived toxic elitism, where there weren't any, became so fierce that the movement of player culture and ideas itself in ESO became so toxic to the point that if you're an endgame PvPer or an endgame PvEer, you must be cheating, you must be hacking, you must be toxic, you must be racist, you must be sexist, you must be everything no one wants to be. Indeed, this is one of the main tactics toxic casuals are using to win even right now. I mean, after all, who will be willing to listen to you, much less join you in your preferred activities if you can't even be part of the conversation to begin with? This is also a shame because endgame players don't pop out of nowhere. We were casuals too once, we were role players, we were people who quested, we just simply went a different path. And of course, with such a huge pushback, I mean, what can you expect? If you're called toxic already, why not be toxic? Or perhaps you just don't give a damn anymore and you don't put effort into building some semblance of a community. And there's plenty of examples for this in both PvE and PvP throughout the years since 2016. But I digress. Continuing with the history, slogans that are common in many places, such as the meta is toxic, elitists are ruining the game, turn into active suppression or dismissal of information such as mathematical formulas that determine things such as damage, healing, and many other things. It didn't matter what the facts were, what the math proved about certain such, or so on. All of it was toxic. Numbers were toxic. Math was toxic. Daring to think of optimizing is toxic. Competency became toxic. Trying to score push is toxic. Wanting to play how you want became toxic, unless it wasn't meta. I'm sure all of you have seen this or experienced this to a degree. But anyway, it was all dismissed or actively attacked. It still is. Were it not for the few individuals and groups that persisted, we would not have had the foundations for an ESO University website or some of the largest raiding guilds today. In terms of scapegoating, with how few actual endgame players there were and are across every platform and server, the need for being outraged on the internet and being self-validated, fueled stories, or perhaps the encounters themselves of players getting kicked from dungeon groups, or being told what to run, or being called slurs or names by other players. Of course, the blame shifted to the in-game players. It still does. Oh, it must be those top leaderboard score raters who queued in a random normal dungeon just to vote kick me. Oh, it must be those Trials players who called my mother a whore. Perhaps some of you watching this video may even think they were or are indeed endgame players, but let me break the news to you. Endgame players do not give a shit about you. We don't care what sets you run. We don't care what you do with your friends. We don't care what you had for breakfast, much less what you're running on your hybrid sorcerer DPS tank build in no armor. More power to you. We just don't give a shit. And no real endgame player wastes time gatekeeping or putting down newer players because, guess what? We need more players. And all this blame fed into this cycle of, well, we're not gonna say anything and tell people what to do or maybe even teach them. And that fed into the next step of, well, why aren't these guys teaching? They're toxic, they're gatekeeping. Well, if we say something, you'll call us toxic anyway. And this was a real, and still is a real experience. That's why most people, when they end up in pugs or what, they don't say anything until they're asked for it. And very rarely do people ask for help. So if you're wondering why some in-game players are hesitant in giving you advice, well, that's because we were called toxic for giving advice. The number of times I've been told, or even experienced myself, these toxic elitists in random groups, is that all the time, they were literally no-name players no one's ever heard of. For example, I had a player who was doing a rather poor 20% of the group DPS compared to my 80%, but still name-calling this new tank and trying to vote kick the tank for dying in Vet Frostfall. Was that an endgame player? No. But the blame shifts to us because it's easier to not think. And it's easier to scapegoat. In fact, for most of us, and I don't know if people even realize this, but the experience of toxicity actually isn't at the in-game level. It's on the way there. I don't know why that is. I don't know why these average or dogshit shitters who don't know anything about the game are toxic to other people, but that's been the case for a very long time and is the case in other games, and the endgame communities in ESO have suffered for it. Now that we've kind of caught up on the basic history of the toxic casual and how that affected the smaller communities, let's discuss an example of attacking and scapegoating. And a key example of attacking and scapegoating minority groups, such as endgame players, is of course Mystic's MMOs. Many of you in the endgame community often laugh at him or are amused by him, but his ideas, his rants, and ideologies are not unique to him, and are actually quite common in much of the ESO player base. The demonization of endgame players, the claims of being bullied despite, striking first, the false logic claims of being correct on incorrect things, and the refusal to recognize nuance or rational thought in favor of safeguarding this amorphous concept of community is everywhere, from Twitter to in-game zone chat. This brings us to the next characteristic of the toxic casual: community. How do politicians or anyone who wants their way within a public setting gather support? You get sympathy. You get people to empathize with your cause or make them think what you want is in their best interest. It's the same with toxic casuals. Anytime they are crusading against something they absolutely hate, whether it's fake tanking, raid requirements, or even PvP as a game mode, they always bring up community. They always bring up new players. Why? Well, it's very hard for anyone to say, fuck the new players. If you do that, you're an asshole. And if you go against the wishes of the majority or the community, well, then you're an outlier. You're a piece of shit vagabond who has absolutely nothing to offer to the betterment of the community. It's basic human manipulation at its core. So what ends up happening is that whenever you bring up a topic like DPS numbers or getting a title or some innocuous thing, you get called an elitist. You get called a gatekeeper. You're demeaned as someone who doesn't give a shit about newer players, and so you don't care about helping others. I've had people come to me and tell me they don't want to try raiding because they might be seen as different by their social circle. That's truly fucked up and shows how effective this tactic has been throughout the years up until this point. This doesn't just occur in PvE instances as well, in terms of scapegoating or shifting the blame. It's also in PvP, where endgame PvPers have either left the game or aren't doing much anymore, but yet are still called toxic or blamed for things like changes to the game because some no-name average PvPers keep stream sniping, saying stupid shit in zone chat, or impersonating actual endgame PvPers like my friend Xplaniside to act toxic. Whenever a person defends their shitty actions or words with the banner of community, that's a huge red flag they're carrying. They don't give a shit about the community. These toxic casuals don't give a shit about you. They don't give a shit about anyone else except themselves and their own convenience. Now, moving on to the next characteristic of a toxic casual, they use double standards. They utilize their lack of a basic understanding of the game, and whether intentional or not, they don't see the sheer ridiculousness of their stances. But it works to their strength, because all of this is backed up by community, and the concept of toxic positivity as well, which seeks to not just gather support of the players, but also to gather the support of the circumstances or even the devs of the game if possible. So 2 examples here. Let's look at fake tanking. Why is it that fake tanking or fake healing a fucking random normal dungeon is seen as toxic? Why is it so that new players always get brought up for random normals? Oh, those poor new players. Or better yet, why is it that when healers or tanks fail to meet certain expectations, they are expected to meet specific standards, whereas the DPS aren't? If you have low DPS, or you just light attack or die or whatever, that's okay. You're learning, oh, it's perfectly acceptable for a random fucking normal. This is just another case, again, of the majority being the toxic casuals, yet again within the role context, that basically can be summed up as rules for thee, but not for me. Yet again, there have been far more players who've told me and other people in the ESO community, or even the YouTube comments on my video, that when they were trying out tanking as a new player or something, they got accused of fake tanking. So they got turned off from tanking, but that's okay. It must have been the toxic leaders or something, right? The funniest thing about this example actually is that Gilliam, the rogue, who is now one of the combat devs for ESO, talked about this weird idea of fake tanking these toxic casuals have a fascination with a few months ago, and his opinion is legitimately actually smart. It's intelligent in regards to the nature of a group finder, the philosophy of the game as a whole, and so forth. I agree with it wholeheartedly. But guess who didn't like it and frothed at the mouth? The toxic casuals. It's so hilarious to me that play how you want doesn't apply when they don't want you to play how you want. Everything must be defined, constricted, restricted by their terms to the point where, isn't that kind of toxic? I don't know. I think even endgame players putting a DPS spec on a main tank for VAS hard mode or VAA are a lot more open-minded than these toxic casuals. The second example of the double standards and claims of the betterment of the ESO fam actually hurting the minority communities is the tragedy of the PvP community, or the tattered dog water remains of it, and this plays into what I've learned and want to avoid, as I'll discuss later on.
But it sucks in the last like couple years how much I've had to myself see, like me and my community, we're treated like shit, like honestly, across the board, and rightfully some people are assholes, and because you guys get angry, I get it. But it sucks seeing people get angry and no solutions come in, and then they're like, man, fuck those PvP people, you know? And in my last couple years, I've tried to tell people to, like, be chill, don't go, especially don't attack the devs and stuff. Like, they're not bad people. They're really not. Like, working with some of the devs and meeting them have been really good times as well. Gina's been the best community manager I've ever seen in any game. It's not even close. But it sucks seeing such a cool community, a large part, like a lot of my community, just treated like, you know. Now I'm not saying like Ce-Nex comes in insults, but because they don't like attack them. But I think we all know it's almost like, oh, here come the PvPers, nothing good to say, a bunch of assholes. If you go in the forums, it's PvEers, and they're like, this is a PvE game, dude. Fuck off, PvPer. You should know you're not going to get anything. Like, I don't know what the point is of even trying to support the game's PvP at this point, is what I'm getting at. It's such a toxic relationship that's been created. If you bring up stuff about PvP as a content creator, and other content creators that do PvP will echo the same sentiment that I am now. It's just not, you're not treated well. Like, you're looked at as like a complainer. And it's part of why we don't get any, you know, we don't get much either.
So for those of you who don't know Fengrush, he is the last of the We Are ESO era, with Cypher PK, Lefty Lucy, and King Richard. He left ESO very recently. I was quite sad about it, and it's amazing that he stuck out for as long as he did. But something resonated with me when he said what you just listened to. The feeling of being told to leave ESO, the feeling of being alienated. You know, a lot of people at this point in the video, they're gonna fucking post stupid comments asking me to go touch grass or why I'm so passionate about a video game, but one, that tells me more about you than it does me, especially if you're watching this video, and two, when you've put the amount of time into ESO like Fengrush or I have, building our communities, building relationships, meaningful relationships or whatever, it's your home and family, man. It's your home, and the feeling of being told to leave your home, the feeling that you don't belong there, or that you're a stranger in your own house, the feeling that the majority of players not liking you or thinking you're some sort of toxic pest that needs to go away, it fucking sucks. And I've experienced it. We've all experienced it. So I'm sure these fucking toxic casuals that tell raiders to stop existing or PvPers that ESO is not a PvP game was one of the many factors in why Fengrush and many other players felt like they just needed to go. And it's not even that. The toxic casuals also use this weird toxic positivity in defense of the game's issues to gaslight people who both love and critique the game. Like, oh my god, Nephis criticized crown crates or the bugs in trials, he must fucking hate ESO, so why is this guy here? Or, wow, Dots Gaming or Ness ESO said, PvP needs a performance fix? Fucking stop complaining and be grateful, you PvP shitters. All of this is an attempt to portray endgame players or specific content creators who lean towards the endgame as bad for not just the community, but for the game. And who wants a bad game, right? No one wants a bad game. I don't want a bad game. You don't want a bad game. Yet, this is another effective tactic that continues to work, and yet another issue for us, because these toxic casuals like to portray all of us as one big happy ESO fam, as they say on Twitter, so if we step out of line, we're fucked. And they refer to all of us as the ESO community. Like we're united. Fuck no, we're not united. Real families and communities don't do this shit to each other. Don't try to oust each other or suppress one another. We were never united. But maybe we can try now that all this shit is laid out and in the open, because we need to recognize that there is a problem in order to solve the problem. Before I talk about the potential solutions and the messages I have for my fellow endgame players, the neutral casual or whatever kind of player there are, and the piece of shit toxic casuals, I want to explain why I'm talking about this now. The reason I'm talking about this now is because I've been held back from discussing this because of the things I just covered. The toxic positivity, fucking multiple people who aren't even endgame players telling me, hey, you can't talk about your opinion because that's just going to divide the community further. You have a responsibility as a content creator. Oh, you're just overreacting, Nephis. It's just you who's being attacked. It's normal to get death threats and told your decades worth of serious mental illness is fake by these toxic casuals, or that it's not actually a lot of players, but fuck all that bullshit, because these toxic casuals are getting bolder. There's more of them by the day, despite, me trying to be moderate about this shit. This is gonna be my first and last video, by the way, talking about this nonsense, because I'm done, man. They keep calling us toxic, and we're just minding our own business. These fucks don't know what real toxicity is at all. and it takes away from the real toxic shit that happens, or fucked up shit that happens in the game, like sexual fucking harassment, stalking, doxing, forcing and passing nudes, fucking pedophiles, by the way. But do they talk about that shit? No, because they don't care about the fucking community, they just care about themselves. So I just want to point people to this video in the future if they ever need an explanation of what I mean by toxic casual, or what's wrong with the ESO community. Recognizing and fighting toxic casuals and how prevalent they really are is really important. And I'm going to use this video as a point in time to see if there will be any improvements at all, at least on our end. This part of the video is both a message to the actual, chill ESO casual players or beginners or non-endgame players, and also the final explanation of how toxic casuals work. I want to talk about how the toxic casuals gatekeep, because the gatekeeping role is traditionally reserved for the elites or the elitists, right? But in reality, it's these elitists like me who have provided mountains and treasure troves of information, from ESO logs to understanding how the game works, from builds to written guides, from teaching raid leads to teaching raiders. I mean, we have over 16,000 people in the goddamn ESO Discord. We're the third largest Discord, and all of the endgame players there share what they have with anybody. We answer everybody's questions. Even score pushers have started sharing what their strats or setups are during the patch, which is fucking unprecedented and mind-boggling, because in the past that shit was hush hush. Now there are discords that just pug and let anyone raid. There's real effort in welcoming anyone really, and we never had all this shit back then. But there's a lot of us who have experienced people looking down on us or treating us like shit when we first started out or whatever. This experience isn't the same for everybody. Some of us persevere and keep going. A lot more get put off and don't try anymore. So the behavior of these toxic casuals, as we've discussed before in the video, in encounters with so many people, and of course with the bullshit they spread on the forums or Facebook groups about what endgame players are really like, despite having never met one probably, of course deter a lot of newer players from trying or wanting to try, because why risk the journey if the destination is worse, right? These toxic casuals, in part, have created this culture of ESO players fearing failure, afraid of making mistakes in group settings, afraid of getting ragged on or called out, and that's all understandable to a degree, but listen guys, they are fucking you in the ass. You paid for this game with your money, or maybe your parents' money, who knows, doesn't matter. It's your world, it's your home, it's your content. Don't let these fucking toxic casuals determine what you want or should do. Don't let someone else ruin the power of your MMO fantasy. Don't let someone else ruin your precious game time. And endgame players don't care if you solo, optimize, do dungeons or PvP or what. Just play. And don't let someone mislead you into a pit of irrational thinking. Just remember, everyone before you and after you have or will fail at some point. It's okay to make mistakes. The best players have and continue to make mistakes. It's okay to look bad. It's okay to be bad. Just keep going and you'll be fine. Now I'm going to talk to my peers in the endgame community, because we have to talk about solutions. What the toxic casuals have done and continue to do may look quite dire for us, and it's commonly said whenever us raiders start talking about this, that we are a very small minority. Very, very, very small. But this can change. I'm going to admit something that perhaps some may already know, maybe more have suspected for some time in the past 1.5 years. One of my biggest focuses has been not just content creation for ESO, but also the normalization and construction of endgame. This is why I went for Twitch partner to create the hard mode stream team. I'm proud to say we've seen quite a few others from the hard mode stream team get Twitch partnership, like Skinny, Airy, Aleph, and more, but we've actually helped change the nature of the ESO Twitch directory. 2 or so years ago, you wouldn't see many raiders stream besides me and J-Dub. Now, it's normal, so normal. Now there's more people and more teams streaming, raiding in the ESO Twitch directory. There's more YouTube content made by endgame players apart from myself. There's more guides, There's more knowledge. We have more websites now, like ESOU, the 10 Club. We have better communal networking in Discord or in-game. We have finally had Endgame players show up on the official Bethesda stream when we did the QuakeCon dungeon competition this year. We are gaining ground, and we've gotten some victories, but they're not enough. Rating retention has always been historically low, and a large part of it definitely has to do with the nature of the game and the lack of a basic reward structure, both temporary and perennial, but it's also in part because of the toxic casuals, and it's time we start shifting even more focus on newer players for raids. Thankfully, some people, including the ESO Runs Discord server and Subeternal, have started doing this more, as the old system of cannibalizing mid-tier teams for higher-end teams is outdated and no longer sustainable, particularly for the endgame progression teams. We have to beat the toxic casuals by disengaging with them, no longer arguing with them, no longer trying to convince them, no longer presenting facts or math or anything of the sort to people who've already made up their minds. No interaction at all. We must focus just on the players who matter. We've done wonderfully in transparency of information, but it's time we improve how we train new raiders, or new raid leads, and more importantly in making raiding enjoyable. Not just for newer players, but for ourselves to avoid burnout until more changes come to the game structure itself. We have to focus even more on building up our own guilds or communities and begin coordinating even more with each other across different platforms and servers in the future, towards the common goal of gaining an astronomical amount of interested players, as this will help us avoid a fatal mistake of the PvP community, which incorrectly focused on their veteran player base for events such as dueling tournaments or other events, rather than going for newer blood. Lastly, this part of the video is a message to the toxic casuals, because I'm sure some of you who have watched my content in the past will watch, or pass this video around to a degree. Shut the fuck up, play the game, mind your own fucking business, you shit for brain cocksucking baboons. I hope you fucking get nothing but crown lethal poisons in your crown crates, and I hope you fucking character names get fucking name changed. I hope whatever semblance of RNG is left in ESO keeps fucking in the ass as much as possible. Stop blaming the endgame players for all your troubles. Go back to school, raise a family, get buried. If you're doo-doo cock at the game, go try to improve like everybody else instead of blaming everybody else. If you're so worried about the community or the new players, go do something productive for them instead of yapping about it all the time. Stop fucking using new players as a fucking shield for your own insecurities. Thanks.